There's this one piece of advice my grandfather gave me. It was so simple, just a few words really, but it completely changed how I look at money, at work, well, everything. And it all comes from his story.
So he says to me, never save money. And I was just floored. I mean, that's the opposite of everything we're ever told, right? You're supposed to save for a rainy day, put money aside. But he just smiled at me and said, don't just save it, make it grow. And to really get what he meant, you have to hear his story.
I know, it sounds totally backwards, doesn't it? But trust me, his reasoning came from a really hard-earned lesson. A journey that took him from a world of just dreaming to a world of actually doing.
See, for a long time, my grandfather, he lived in this little village, and he was known as the dreamer. A good man for sure, but he spent most of his days just sitting under a tree thinking about all the amazing things he was going to do someday.
He was living in two totally different worlds. In his head, it was all grand plans. One day, I'm going to open a shop. One day, we'll be rich. But the reality? The reality was that his family was poor. My grandmother worked so hard just to get by, and that one day he was always talking about, it just never seemed to show up. I remember him telling me about the night my grandmother said this to him. She wasn't angry, her voice was just sad. It was this gentle, heartbreaking truth. She knew he had dreams, but she also knew what they needed right then and there. And beautiful dreams, well, they just weren't enough. For years, he'd just nod and promise someday, but then came the moment that made someday feel like an impossible lie. A moment that was so quiet, but it just shattered everything for him.
That question came from me. I was just a little kid. I was hungry, and I asked him this simple, innocent question. But for him, it was like a lightning bolt, because you can't answer a hungry child with a dream.
My grandmother went to the cupboard, and she opened it. It was completely bare. Nothing. No bread, no rice, nothing. That empty shelf, it was like a mirror reflecting all of his empty promises. He saw the hunger in my eyes, and he said that was the first time he truly felt the crushing weight of doing nothing.
That was it. That was the night it all changed. He didn't sleep, he just sat there in the dark and finally, truly understood. Dreams are the start, but they're not the journey. It was time to wake up.
So the very next day, he went out and found work in the fields. It was hard, grueling work, but he was determined. And then he heard some of the other workers talking about the secret to getting ahead: saving. It sounded so smart, so responsible, it seemed like the answer. He got this old glass jar and started putting coins in it every single week. That clinking sound was the sound of hope in our little house. I remember finding it once, and he just smiled and said, "This is our tomorrow." And he really truly believed it. But that tomorrow came with a price. Every coin that went into that jar meant a little less food on the table, meant shoes that were a little more worn out. But he stuck with it, and after a whole year of sacrifice, the jar was finally full to the top. He was so proud. He thought, we've done it. We're safe. He took that full jar of coins to the market, planning to buy 3 big sacks of corn. He proudly poured the money onto the counter. The shopkeeper counted it all, then looked up, shook his head, and said 3 little words that just broke my grandfather's heart. Prices went up.
So let me just show you the brutal math of what happened. He had saved enough money to buy 3 sacks of corn. That was the goal. But a year later, because of inflation, that same amount of money could only buy 1.5 sacks. His savings were literally cut in half while they just sat there, doing nothing.
He was absolutely devastated, defeated. But as he was sitting there, feeling hopeless, he started watching his neighbors. He noticed they weren't just saving money. They had things that made things. One had a cow for milk, another had chickens for eggs. And that's when a tiny little idea started to spark.
He came home and asked me that simple question. It wasn't a big, far-off dream about a fancy shop. It was small. It was real. It was something he could do. What if we buy chickens?
And you know what? This time was different. He didn't talk about doing it someday. He took the money from that very same jar, went right back to the market, and he bought a few chickens. He acted.
And he built this amazing little system. He didn't just spend the money, he invested it. The chickens laid eggs. We ate some of the eggs and we sold the rest. Then, and this is the crucial part, he took the money from selling the eggs and bought more chickens. He was building his own tiny little egg factory, as I called it. It wasn't some get-rich-quick scheme. It was slow, it was steady, but it was real.
For the first time in his life, he wasn't just dreaming about the future. He was building it. And slowly but surely, hope started to fill our house again.
And through all of this, the dreaming, the failure, the hard work, he finally learned his most important lesson. This wasn't something you could read in a book. This was wisdom he earned with his own 2 hands.
One day, he held up a fresh egg and told me, This is more powerful than a whole jar of money. And I finally understood. Money in a jar is static. It can lose its power. But an egg represents potential. It represents production, growth. It's a living asset.
So that's what he meant by make money grow. It's not about just hiding your coins away. It's about using those coins to buy something, no matter how small, that can create more value, something that becomes bigger all on its own. He gave me this amazing way to picture it. He said, just saving money is like trying to hold water in your hands. You can try to hold on tight, but it's always slipping through your fingers. But making money grow, that's like planting a seed. You invest a little, you take care of it, and that tiny seed can grow into a huge tree that provides for you again and again.
So that's my grandfather's lesson. It's all about that shift from dreaming about someday to taking action today. His entire future started with just a few chickens. So the real question for all of us is, what's your egg? What's the small seed you can plant today that could grow into your entire future?